and welcome to another session in our Good Design is Good Business series that's hosted on DeveloperWorks. And I'm always pleased to have speakers that come from our customers. This week is especially true of that. Our guest speaker is Arman Atashi from BlueCross and BlueShield of North Carolina. And before I turn it over to Arman, who will talk about some design best practices at BlueCross and BlueShield, just a few logistics. One, of course, your host is me below on the slides that you have down there. I'm Roger Snook from the IBM Rational Software Group. And you can find me on SlideShare, YouTube, and LinkedIn, so join me at any one of those social sites. And you can also get a hold of slides from this session as well as the recording, or connect on LinkedIn to find out some updates in the future. This is a series. We've had a number of calls already from our customers as well as business partners and IBMers all around the topic of how good design can help our businesses thrive and be more productive, coining the phrase from IBM founder Thomas Watson, good design is good business. Today's call is being recorded, so once we open up the lines for questions, if you don't want to speak, please refrain from so. But it will be recorded and posted up on our all the sites that you saw mentioned earlier. Our agenda today is to hear our customer, Arman, talk about the M3 methodology. But when we talk about this, let me put it in the context of the value that it has provided BlueCross and BlueShield. And not only will you hear about how BlueCross and BlueShield has consistency in communication and standards and leveraging standards, but it has really simplified the collaboration that they have had internally to both design and develop systems that realize their business. It also helps minimize a lot of the, what we'll call unproductive noise, where do I find such and such? How do I make sense of this diagram or that diagram in the absence of having any standards, of course? Overall, this solution has provided some initial productivity estimates up to 25%. So that productivity gain, of course, helps everyone involved with the variety of levels of projects that are being worked out of this system to focus on the things that really matter to the business rather than the unproductive, busy work that often our customers go through in realizing software for their projects. And additionally, it's also targeted to help with BlueCross meet some compliance needs. So I'm really excited to hear about that because we're striking on some very important business topics all around. Today is part one of 3, so we have some follow-on sessions where we'll also get into more of realizing a system designed from M3, as well as looking at in the bigger picture of perhaps a TOGAF representation. So all of those attending today's call will also be sure to should also be sure to join the subsequent calls to learn more about this methodology that we'll talk about today. With that, let me go ahead and turn it over to Arman. So Arman, I'm going to go ahead and transfer you over as presenter. You should now see the buttons show up on your screen and be able to take it from here. Arman, thank you for presenting today.
Well, thanks for that introduction, Roger. I'm excited to be talking about a methodology, modeling methodology that was incepted about 2 years ago here at BlueCross BlueShield, and we have refined it. Now pretty much every initiative within BlueCross BlueShield that requires modeling, architecture, assessment is based on M3 modeling methodology. As Roger mentioned, this is just an overview. Talk about some of the highlights of what this modeling is all about, talk about some of the constructs, but 2 weeks from now, the second session is, I think it will be really exciting. Well, I will use RSA and basically walk through the modeling of a web storefront that is deployed as a software as a service in the cloud. The reason I actually want to do that here today at BlueCross BlueShield, we're all looking forward to the cloud computing and software as a service model of integration. So that gives us a good view of it. and I will build the consumer side of it and the service provider side of the software as a service web storefront. And then on the last session, we bring it all that model within an enterprise view. Look at this software as a service, how does it integrate with the rest of the enterprise applications and systems. And to do that, we bring M3 within the concepts of TOGAF as a framework for architecture. So we show how we build the views, architectural domains we use within the TOGAF, using and mapping M3 models and elements into that. So today's session is an introduction to M3. I will talk about the concepts. I will look at MDA and UML importance within the M3 modeling practice. The modeling context is by far probably the most interesting part of this session. I will talk about the workflows within each step, and when we build the application 2 weeks from today, I will come back and review those to show how do we actually go from point A to point B, and how do we maintain the model consistency. The RSA model template basically shows us how we have actually brought this concept within a modeling tool, RSA, and how RSA actually helps us manage and maintain the models itself. The integration model and view aggregations, I will talk briefly, but you will see those during the TOGAF presentation, is how M3 extends model-driven architecture principles that now you can apply to an enterprise-level architecture. And then briefly, ownership is important, collaboration is important. I'll talk about that, what we've done here, and that's a still work in progress, and then what the big picture is. So what is M3? It is a discipline agile system modeling that is based on OMG, Object Management Group, Unified Modeling Language. That's our notation, and principles model-driven architecture. But without the tools, obviously, this could not be done. So we use Rational Software Architect and Team Concert for version control and creation of model, and we've just started beginning to use the Rational Software Design Manager, RDM, for collaboration. The whole premise mod M3, as I mentioned, was based on 3 broad strategies within our organization. We wanted to make sure that we apply service-oriented architecture fundamentals to our modeling language, because we do know we're going toward a service-oriented architecture. Our business model is constantly evolving, and we need to address those complexities within the enterprise organization, as well as when we look at problem statements, we look at it from multiple views, from the top, bottom, in the middle. So we wanted to make sure the methodology that we have actually brings and helps us to identify these types of architectural patterns in the modeling. We have the same problem that everyone has in the industry. We're given a set of requirements, and the challenges here for us has been, so I need to take that into an implementation, but what is that architecture is going to look like? So M3, it actually comes right in the middle within the architecture and helps to refine and address complex requirements management in terms of business requirements as well as non-functional requirements. And then the implementation becomes a lot more complex. As I mentioned, we're integrating nowadays more than building, and we're building integration points, and we're using message bus ESB technology to satisfy the needs of the interfaces. So M3 is positioned to help us to meet the challenges of our architectural effort. The approach M3 actually takes is very simple. It acknowledges that requirements are all use cases. Use cases do define the requirements, and we look at a use case, but very more not based on a use case driven methodology that has been around like unified process. But we understand that, and we also recognize use cases can also be, stories and user stories within the agile practice. But that is an important concept within the M3. We need to know what is the requirement. And then the model-driven architecture is definitely something that we do utilize in terms of the scope of the space of the modeling. We adhere to those 3 spaces of and you'll see as I talk about that. But most importantly is, if you look at the traditional software methodology, as I look at it here, you have object orientation and then component-based development and service-oriented. The focus of M3 is really in the middle layer, building, identifying components. Because then once we've done a good job of defining components, then the sky is the limit. We can describe them in terms of services, or we can describe them in terms of interfaces, and we can do many, many things with those components. We describe components at multiple levels, in fact, at 2 levels. The ones that are independent of the technology, they're the ones that are tied into the technology. And of course, RSA helps us to bring in all of this information in and manage it. So that is our approach here. The modeling concept, we struggle with this like many people do. System modeling is complex, so I put these definitions in here to recognize that we do also recognize the difference between a model and a diagram. At the same time, we recognize that we have to, within BlueCross BlueShield, respect other types of modeling that takes place within our organization. There's a lot of activities around flowcharts, functional block, business process modeling, domain modeling. There are other kinds of MDAs that is going on. So M3 needs to accept and adhere to many of these methodologies and terminologies. And so it was built to make sure that actually facilitates many of these concepts as we evolve the models. Now look at M3 itself. It's a framework, so you can actually use it to apply to a number of architectural challenges within an organization. But its fundamental says there's 5 components within the framework. Modeling notation, that is UML. Modeling workflow is based on the model-driven architecture, MDA. The modeling environment certainly is rational tools. And then the integration model and view aggregation, and I'll talk about that. Those are the extension as you evolve your modeling framework, as you learn more about the behavioral patterns of the architectural components that you need. Within each framework, there are concepts these components have. I want to make sure on this left side, modeling notation and modeling workflow really addresses the MDA principle and disciplines. I will go over briefly in a later slide, show you that we don't use all the notation model elements of UML. It doesn't mean that you cannot do it, but in order to have it accepted within the organization and make sure that it doesn't become a major task to learn a very complex language like UML, we've identified subparts of the notation. The workflow itself is based on MDA, but what it does is it distinguishes what is CIM, what is PIM, what is PSM. A computation independent model, we look at it, that's the outside view of the problem. The PIM, what we call, is the edge of the problem, and that's where we start identifying the components. And then the inside, where we do more deployment diagrams and deployment models, is the platform-specific model. The tools, our environment is RSA, Rational Team Concert, for versioning, version control, and then RDM to collaborate. Up to now, we've been using the web publishing of the RSA, and we're so excited about the RDM that it simplifies all of that. This other side, and this, I think there's, the way it was published, maybe it's hard to read, but it says context for enterprise modeling. That's the extension what M3 brings in that allows us to create views, aggregate them, and also create what we call independent integration-specific model, ISM, that allows us to do model reuse. I'll talk about those as we go through a couple of other slides. So now let's look at what I just talked. What type of UML elements are used, and what is the purpose of the MDA within the usage within the M3? We do know that UML has many types and diagrams. For purpose of M3, we use a subset of that, of a structural and behavioral diagram. And as you can see, we also show where they should be applied as a guideline. It's not all inclusive. It doesn't mean you cannot deviate from it. So if you look at package is always used across CIM, PIM, PSM, and ISM. State machine is not used in ISM. We tend to use the use cases at the CIM and possibly at ISM level. Activities are here, and you can see the component diagrams by far are used widely across. As I said, M3 focuses a whole lot on components than anything else. So that's the usage of the M3 within UML within M3. But as I said, that doesn't mean that you cannot use other types of diagram if you need communication diagrams, the timing diagrams. If an application is real-time and specific, that those can also be used as well. And the basic principle of MDA applies that we focus on 3 levels of space within the viewpoints: computational independent, platform independent, and platform specific. As I mentioned, within the M3, the computational independent model, we look at it as the outside view. The platform independent is the edge, and then the platform specific is what we call the inside of our problem domain. And the viewpoint is pretty much the same thing. So we do adhere to the concepts of MDA at the highest level. Okay, now it's time for any questions, if there's any questions.
Yeah, and if you do have a question, you have a couple of options. One, you can post your question on the chat window, which is on the right-hand side. There's a little blue bubble that you can type in a question. We have one question there already. And then the other way is just through the phone here. And if you haven't already, you can hit *6 to unmute your line to ask a question. Right now, Armand Hamid has asked which cloud providers are used for your SaaS deployment.
We have, for the RSA itself is Cloud One. All of our tools, the RTC and RSA is, actually RSA is not, but we do connect with the RTC. Rational Team Concert and Rational Composer, that's, I think, the requirement composer. They're both hosted by Cloud One. But from a specific application within the BlueCross BlueShield, we're working with multiple vendors, and all of our data center today is managed by Fujitsu, actually. So that is our #1 platform as a service. But in terms of software as a service, now we're moving forward with some additional vendors that we are basically getting ready to describe the contracts.
Great. And, also in attendance today is one of our former speakers, Irv Bader, and Irv actually did a session on the telco ML standard, which he is in charge of at IBM and leading our efforts there. He asks, what's the planned SOA usage, and does it involve SOA ML, which is also profiled by Rational Software Architect?
Yes, so you will see actually in the presentation, the templates do bring in the SOA ML profile, and we are using it, but the learning curve has been a lot longer than was expected. When I build the application that we talked about for the second session, I will actually demonstrate the use of SOA ML with the components and interfaces. But the answer to the question is that is definitely in our roadmap. We definitely are interested in using it. It's been a growing pain to get everyone to adhere to it and understand it.
Excellent. We do have a couple other questions, but I think that those answers will probably be revealed in your next set of slides. So if you want to carry forward, and we'll stop at the next break to answer both Stephen and Richard's questions.
Yes,
that they have. Okay, Arma?
Yes, I'll address those as well.
And again, if you have a question at any time, just hit *6 to unmute your line and ask the question. But otherwise, Armand, go ahead and carry forward to slide 14.
All right, thanks. So now, probably the more exciting part of this presentation, the modeling context. Let's look at what is really behind this. So this slide tries to show within the modeling practice, we all know that there are business process modeling that is taking place within the enterprise. We do know that there's platforms that applications that have to be deployed, have to be managed. M3 addresses the middle part, the system modeling. Now, within the MDA terminology and concept, that's what this CIM is considered: problem domain, business concept, requirements, and you can read that. And the platform model, which MDA really doesn't address a whole lot, but it's got a placeholder for it. What M3 does, it uses the same concept, except it believes that's a business model is the outside, the logical system model, what we call, is the edge, and then the technology specification model is what platform and specific model is. And what M3 includes and adds is this concept of platform-specific implementation. So M3 is more about modeling than transformation. Some of you guys who have worked with MDA-based products, or even if you've attempted to use the methodology itself, you know that most of the emphasis is from PIM to PSM, there's transformation and automation. M3 believes all of that takes place outside of the three models of the outside, the edge, and the inside, and that's what we call platform-specific implementation. That's where the scripts are made, that's what the code is generated. We don't look at, M3 doesn't look at code that is generated as a model, but it's a specific implementation.
Question?
Yes.
I don't understand the metaphor of outside edge and inside. The edge of what?
The edge of the problem domain, the edge of the system that we're designing.
The system boundary?
That's correct. That's the system boundary, right? You see the concept of edge becomes more important because we stay focused on the interface specification and component interfaces. So we stop people to go inside. So that was the edge, but it's the boundary. That's correct.
Okay, my understanding of a platform-independent model is that it's going to be more like an internal component model. It's not going to stop at the system boundary.
Yeah, that's a good point. So again, the edge is the logical system model. Maybe that's so when the guideline is, as you're describing your model at the PIM, concentrate on the boundary and the interfaces. That's what he's trying to say. But at the same time, if you end up looking inside the system, that's okay too. But it's the focus of what is it that you're trying to design in the model. Maybe you actually, when you see some of the package definitions and UML models that are part of the PIM, maybe that might help to clarify.
Okay, so it sounds more like a component model.
Yes.
Not necessarily at the system boundary, but any components. Any
component, and that's correct. So the focus is business types, objects, interfaces, components, services, messages. That's what that's in the middle part actually describes right in here. When I move forward, you'll see some of the packages and definitions, what goes on, and I will talk about workflow, so maybe that might make it a little bit more clear. Okay, so that's from a perspective of the context of the enterprise modeling. You can also compare M3 with any generic software development lifecycle. And one of the reasons this slide is part of the presentations as we evolve M3 is because within our organization, there are people that understand requirements modeling, high-level design. So basically it says you can take any standard SDLC, even Agile, and what you're really going to see when you're using M3, when you're doing the CIM, you're basically describing your requirement model. When you're doing the PIM, you're describing your high-level design. And when you're doing your PSM, you're doing your detailed design. And then implementation artifact is outside the scope of M3, and that's what it's called. We've given a name, platform-specific implementation. And that was just for comparative of people ask, how does M3 fit into a life cycle of a software development? And That's typically what the answer is. Now let's look at those level 1, level 2, level 3. As I said, M3 modeling at 3 levels. Level 1 that we call the outside. It captures the business requirement in the language that is familiar to the end users. We all know that. So what we do within the template, there is a domain model, use case model, and activity model. You don't have to have all of them. In fact, we have described one of the minimum requirements. You certainly need to have a use case model. Not every application needs to understand and describe the domain model, nor there should be an activity model. But as complex applications, and you see the one that I will actually build, there will be pieces of these in the model. And the definition of use case model, activity models, and domain model really doesn't change a whole lot. Although the domain model at times gets redefined by different organizations, different groups, and we do know domain modeling means at times something different to different groups and organizations. So let's look at what really happens within the CIM when you're modeling the models that we just talked about. Typically, we get business process model. You have some architectural model from the business perspective. You bring in domain knowledge. You have requirements. You have business features, external system models. All of that are input within the 4 key activities within the CIM. You model the business scenarios. You model the business concepts. You identify and model use cases, and you describe the system boundary. And the concepts as they're modeled, they have the placeholder for them. They go into the activity model, business concepts, they're part of the domain model, and scenarios, identify and model use cases, and the boundaries are part of the use case model. So that gives you a general perspective of the types of activity that is taking place during this CIM, the outside workflow modeling. PIM, which is the level 2 model, platform independent model, specified solution that is not tied to any choice of a specific computing platform. Here we do type modeling, we do component modeling, and we do service modeling. The component model by far is a requirement. You might not need to have a type model, again, depending on the application you're identifying or the enterprise integration you're describing. And the service model is the one that will include the SOML concepts, constructs in there. It was introduced to be forward-thinking, but as I mentioned, we're working very hard to get that introduced and make it a permanent part of the modeling effort. Let's look at what really takes place during the PIM modeling. So the input from the CIM, the domain model, the use case model that we saw, they are now input into the PIM activities. In the PIM activities, we discover business types based on the domain model and the use cases. We identify interfaces. That's by far the most important aspects of the M3. Very interfaces specific because the interfaces help us understand, identify components and their interaction and the service models that we need to build. The output of these activities, models that are created, they go into the type model, the component model, and the service model. By far the most important part of the M3 modeling, and we focus a whole lot in this area. And that's, I forgot the gentleman who was asking, this is what we call the edge, or identifying the interface specs, the components, their interaction, and the service definitions. And the last level, level 3, which is the PSM, it's pretty much now we've identified our technology, we identified the platforms, we now go out there and build these types of models in terms of data model. That's as close we come to a physical data layout. Runtime model, which now shows all the components that were identified within the component models and interaction in the PIM. We now show we instantiate those, we show the relationship within a runtime environment. And of course, the deployment model shows you how these applications, models, components are going to be deployed to a target platform. Again, as a minimum, runtime model is a must-have. The data model and deployment model can also be ignored if the application is small enough and doesn't require it, or if you're building it on an existing platform. So what takes place within the PSM, just like PIM, the input from PIM brings in information. The type model, the component model, as well as the service model allows us to identify deployment characteristics. That's a key activity that we actually tend to work in here, because most of our products or applications are built on existing platforms. We construct logical data model if there's any integration in terms of extracts, or if there's transformation of data, this is where it takes place. We instantiate components to understand the technology platform and service model, and we allocate components and modules to where they need to be. The result of that goes to the data model, deployment model, and runtime model of the PSM. The integration-specific model, I've not talked about the workflow. That's probably I'll address it at some time later during the third session, actually, what that means. So now we talked about that. Now let's quickly go look at how the templates within RSA helps us identify and create these models. Within the RSA, the M3 models, each one, the CIM, PIM, and PSM are a distinct EMX file. They're published from RSA to RTC, Rational Team Concert, and we manage them as models are being updated. At the highest level, there is a dependency between PIM to CIM and PSM to PIM, as you see. All models have to trace back to CIM, and then all the implementation needs to adhere to the PIM specification. These models, today, these templates are maintained in RAM, but I didn't mention that, but we're actually trying to evolve that thing so we can actually utilize it within the RTC. So every project it starts, imports the templates, and it starts building the application based on the templates. The RSA model at each level, at the CIM, PIM, PSM, have what I call a meta dependency at the highest level. So you can notice as we model the domain model and the use case model, there is traceability back to the requirements, back to the activity model. Activity models have to trace back to business processes. It is not automated, but this is a guideline. So as designers, modelers work toward the goal, they adhere to these requirements from a traceability perspective. Same thing, the PIM now shows that it has also dependencies within its packages. And the question of package that was brought up, these are what we mean by packages. There's a type model, there's a service model, the component model. Again, service model traces back to the component model. Service model has to trace back to the type. You notice the type model traces back to the domain model itself. And the component model must adhere to the use case model as well, too. And then the third one, which is the PSM, has the same set of high-level dependencies in terms of models that are in each package. As you notice, the most important one is the runtime model, that it traces back to the component model. And we saw the component model traces back to the use case model. By far the most important traceability concept that we tend to look at and make sure that actually takes place. So I'm going to touch briefly on the extensions of the M3, which is the integration model and view aggregation. And as I mentioned, we will evolve this and talk about this during the third session as we map the M3 to TOGAF. So as you noticed in the previous slides, there is a very tight dependency between the models in CIM and the PIM and PSM. So the whole concept is, if I need to reuse, and we've had challenges here, how do I reuse models that are coming from a specific application, a specific enterprise integration model? Well, we've identified this independent, what we call the integration-specific model, that is independent of the other three models, but adheres to their guidelines. It's the viewpoint, but it is up to the modeler that needs to now create, extract important aspects of the CIM, PIM, and PSM and bring it into what is called the integration model for integration-specific needs. I've identified at both layers, at 3 layers of business, interface, and platform, but most probably the integration model becomes extremely valuable at the platform or at the interface layer. And the platform has a subset of the PSM where the designer, the architect recognizes this is something for reuse, so it will expose that into a separate model. So now we break the dependencies and the reuse becomes a simpler task. At the interface level, that's where all the PIM components are. That becomes also really valuable. If someone has already modeled an interface specific and it's identified the operations, there's no reason to recreate that nor bring the whole model, just bring that a specific interface. At the business level, it's tougher. We are, as I said, this is a framework. We have identified very few of these integration-specific models, but I will walk through one of them that actually is being widely used in the example that I actually walked through, and that really addresses the use of single sign-on and SAML. We tend to model that a lot, many different ways, and the services behind it, and that has been very, very helpful. That's for reuse and collaboration and reuse of the model. That's what the integration model is. That's how we extended the MDA. The view aggregation is a concept that allows us to aggregate the models that we've created in all 3 levels, CIM, PIM, and PSM, and address an enterprise-level concern from an architecture specific. So if we look at standard enterprise architecture domains that are today in most of the standard frameworks address those, there's a business architecture, there's an information architecture, application, and technical architecture. So M3 acknowledges that, and the way it has identified the UML packages within each level of modeling, the CIM, PIM, and PSM, it allows you to aggregate them and create specific views. So if you take a domain model from CIM, a use case model, an activity model, and a service model from PIM, you really not have a business architecture. If you aggregate this domain model from CIM, type model from PIM, and the data model from PSM, you have an information architecture. And you can see the technical architecture is also the data model, the deployment model. This concept of loosely coupling the models within each level of modeling at CIM, PIM, PSM allows us to take this and map it to standard architectural frameworks such as TOGAF, and you will see the 3rd session, that's how it actually is conducted. So the last piece is what I call the ownership as an important aspect, and the framework itself will summarize it and what it means in terms of the holistic view of the M3 modeling practice within BlueCross BlueShield. So we have this chart in here, and we identify that M3 model has specific types of packages that describe the models, activity model, use case model, domain model you saw. We've identified some role that needs to be part of this. Here we've had, and these are generic roles, I guess. A system analyst typically gets involved in the modeling of the CIM. At the PIM, a project lead architect or some form of an architect, could be a domain architect, they're actually modeling and owning the PIM. I've identified in here also some collaboration. So the domain architect works with project lead architect. The same person can wear multiple hats, doesn't mean that you have to have them all. And then you can see that at the PSM, application system designer owns this, but the project lead architect and data model gets involved in this. We have done a good job in this within, but at times rules have to be broken because you might not have all the roles defined, nor every modeling effort requires the efforts and the collaboration of such as these the roles that I've identified here. So we also have a model we use and we show it that shows who actually does what and what group they're part of. Now, this is the big picture, the methodology summary. And basically, it identifies everything we just talked about. There is modeling workflow. Why do we do this? What is at each level? What happens? Who does what? Who owns the models? This is the roles and responsibilities. This shows you the M3 models, what kind of packages, what kind of models each level has, and of course the usage of UML diagrams, what is being used, and the common ones are here, the packages and the state machine that can be used. It has helped a lot in terms of putting the whole methodology and focus in one slide. Helps us to articulate, look at, validate, and we use this as more of also a guideline to make sure that we're meeting some of the high-level requirements of modeling methodology. And what's the big picture here? So M3 helps and tries to become a complete framework for enterprise modeling. And you notice when I talked about the integration aspects of it and architecture representation. So we do have the center is the MDA based. What we talked about, the enterprise architecture is how the views are going to be aggregated, and then what we've demonstrated through the TOGAF. And then the model we use, and our biggest challenge today is our integrations at different levels, either at the interface level or at the platform level. That's the one that actually brings it all together. So it tries to be the framework for all types of enterprise modeling challenges as well as architectural challenges. And with that, that's the end of the presentation. I'm open to questions now.
Again, please hit *6 on your phone to ask a question. Let's see, Steve Hovater has a couple of questions in there. Is there any use of transformations to go to one model to the other, as you showed in perhaps slide 20?
No, but actually I've just started another project, and I think we're going to look to see using the JET transformation. I started using the JET transformation, bringing information from outside into the model itself by having the business descriptions of the objects and relationships. And we're trying to see if we can utilize the JET transformation to actually automate that process. But that's work in progress.
So, Armand, is that the structured data importer transformation you're talking about?
That's correct, yes.
Very good.
In fact, I was talking to Roger, it's very exciting what we've accomplished, and hopefully that would be yet another presentation by itself, how we bring in the outside world into the M3 and build these things through the automation.
Is M3 just a BlueCross BlueShield initiative, or is it outside of BlueCross BlueShield?
It's an initiative within the BlueCross BlueShield of North Carolina, right? It has started, as I said, we were frustrated, complex models were being developed in many ways to bring in a standard methodology like MDA-based approach, UML notation, and see if we can actually satisfy the needs of all of the initiatives within our organization. Now we have demonstrated this to some of our partners, and the goal is, as we move forward, we will use M3 as the means of communicating model artifacts, and there is a strong interest in that as we speak today. Okay.
For IBMers, there is a link to the reference, actually. I didn't even know, Armand, this existed until Neil Patterson found it. And we're going to probably try to schedule a little time with you sometime next week, if possible, to talk about that a little bit further. But that's in the chat window on the right, again, for the IBMers. I don't think, Neil, is that an externally available link as well? *6 to come off of mute. And then, of course, if there are other questions, Richard, I don't know, Richard Yee, I don't know if your question got answered earlier or not, but feel free to ask that.
Yeah, sorry, Roger. I don't believe that it's externally available for the IBMers. They can get to it. There is a blinded case study as well that you can find a link to there. You know, that it would be good, as I was mentioning in the chat, to you know, see if we can move this beyond a blinded study. We have a lot of BlueCross, BlueShield open references. It would be good to be able to get this one there as well, because you're talking about a lot of really great use of the technology, and we want to get people excited about that.
That's great. I'm glad. That's nice.
And I forgot to mention, of course, to anyone that's on this call, that Armon has presented previously at Innovate conferences. So you may have seen some version of this content previously, and are likely to see that in future Innovate conferences as well. So.
This is Richard. So the package diagram is just what, a class diagram showing package dependencies?
Yes. So we use the package to group concepts at each level. So at the highest level, as you saw, M3 describes models at each layer through 3 packages. For instance, at the CIM, we talk about use case model, activity model, and the domain model. Now, within each one of those packages, everyone is free to create other packages to bring together the concerns and different levels of refinement within their model.
Okay, I just asked because in that table, most of those were actual diagram types, but I don't think there's a package diagram type.
Yeah, so that's very interesting. We were trying to, very good point. We have some folks here that adhere to the standards, and there was always a debate that UML does not describe a package diagram. And so we were going back and forth. And if you look at it within the so many diagrams, 14 or so, that UML 2.3, they don't have it specifically, I'm not sure, describe a package diagram. So I did not put it in. But if you look at the way I presented the dependencies, those are package diagrams. Actually, the templates start off with a package diagram. Okay.
Are these charts going to be available for us to download?
Yes, actually, I went ahead and they're, I think, done uploading to SlideShare right now. I was going to post that link here just momentarily, but it will also be in the developerWorks launch page as well. So,
one note, you noticed, and I'm going to go back to this M3 logo is actually mine, but through some upload transformation, and I had the same concept that showed up when I was at Rational. Through the upload, this whole concept, it should look like what this is here, but this is an image, and this was the text, and it didn't make it. So if it looks funny, it's because of the transformation and upload of the PowerPoint that I gave you, Roger.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. Yeah.
That's okay. And some of the font I noticed changed, and it was hard to read, and that's through this transformation exchange of information that we still haven't mastered it yet.
And as a general question, are you finding, for the business domain models and other modeling you're doing for the quote business users, that they are able to, understand that and appreciate it, and then give you feedback based upon the models, or are you finding that still a slog, perhaps?
It is one of our biggest challenges, because again, the fundamental of M3 is UML, understanding the notation. What they have, and we constantly educate. We have trainings and brainstorming sessions. But what it is trying to promote that they have recognized UML is such a rich language, so no longer you draw a line between 2 boxes. There's so many ways you can interpret that. And they have seen the value of that, and they're trying to adapt to it. One of the biggest problem is typically the direction of arrow where you draw. For people who have not used UML, it takes some time to understand what is the difference between an association and a dependency. Other than that, we're coming along. The RDM is going to help us a lot. The challenge has been to Not everybody has RSA, so we have to share this through publishing, through the web publishing of RSA. And then now they should be able to walk through and understand it. But we've had challenges in that aspect. You're right.
So Armin, are you looking at Design Manager as a way to kind of enhance that ability to get other people involved?
Definitely. In fact, our Cloud One, we just learned, and I just noticed they did not have the latest RDM. We're in the process of promoting that thing and having that available. That is by far the best thing that we could have asked for. As I said, for the designers, modelers, architects like myself, maintaining the multiple versions of the web publishing, and as you know, the diagrams are not that good within the browser, but the RDM is great. And the fact that it allows us to do collaboration and then annotation, that part of it is even, yes, it is it's going to be promoted, and I'm hoping within the next year we have a whole lot of users using it.
Excellent. And who was the gentleman that asked a question about the difficulty in communicating and or understanding to decision makers?
On the IBM side, it's Kevin Julier, I believe. It was me.
Oh, hey, Kevin. Yeah, and you know, are you with GBS by chance?
No, I'm actually with Software Group Industry Solutions. But you know,
okay. There's probably also a great team in GBS that you can connect with that has had a considerable amount of success in working with the federal customer in communicating their UML designs, and clearly it's a simplified set of diagrams that they're providing to the customer, not the detailed, you know, class diagrams per se, but, you know, higher level diagrams that make more sense to the business user. And that project has done a tremendous job. It's a very large project, but it gets their buy-in and concurrence on how to proceed in the next, you know, iterations of their project. So I'll be happy to.
Yeah, if you could, it's Kevin
Absolutely.
Julier, Julier.
I see you right on there, Kevin, and I'm going to send you an internal link for that project because I'm not sure if that's an externally consumable project. So.
And to find out a continual challenge is just, you know.
Yeah, if I can add actually, so that now I know, so I forgot you mentioned. So one of the nice things that RSA introduced was the sketching feature that we started using at 8.04. I forgot which one it was. So we, as architects, now we use the sketching. If we have difficulties to communicate them, we use this sketch a lot to capture the conceptual models and walk them through, and then later on we convert those to UML. And that has been a great tool. At times, some of the modelers are using too much sketching, where we need to stop that because we want to make sure we promote the UML and the whole modeling notation. But that has been a great tool. So the same tool allows us to use, communicate, and help refine that collaboration that you talked about that is at times difficult.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
And I'm going to paste that link in for everyone to see, that is IBMers, to see that internal case study to talk about that with the team. And again, slides are being processed, but please go back to the developerWorks landing site, which I'm also going to post that link in there. That's the final link that I posted in the chat. And once those have been processed by SlideShare, they will be downloadable. And the recording of this may take a little bit longer to upload, but that will also be available for your viewing pleasure. So, Armand, any closing thoughts today?
No, I strongly recommend to attend the next session 2 weeks from today, because I think at times you see this all looks good, you've seen it, concept models make sense, but when you see it in action and how it helps you solve problems and ask questions, that's the power of M3, and that's what has been helping us a lot to move forward.